Okay, there we are, live recording. Welcome, everybody. We've got Woody Brock here for an update, and welcome, Woody. Great to see you again. Look
Thank
the
you.
same as ever.
Now, Ken and Joe, can you hear me all right?
Ken
Yep.
and Joe.
Yours
Oh yeah,
sound great to
yeah,
me.
loud and clear.
You are loud and clear. Okay. Please, as always, feel free to interrupt, disagree with me, or ask a follow-on question, because I don't want to just lecture. Right. So, for topic number, what's your biggest between you? What do you worry about the most?
Well, let's just load it out so the four of us can think here, and then people who are joining us can write questions themselves. So let me just try one thing here, Woody. See if I can do this. So you typically have a few points of discussion. And for those who are not familiar with Dr. Brock, feel free to search him on the web, and the words will speak for themselves. The relevance outcome of the election to the economy, that's going to be very important. We'll start with that. The separate threats posed by each candidate. I'm sure we all saw the debate. Prospects for the economy and interest rates. So those are two to three areas of discussion. And then while you start talking, Woody, I'm gonna shut the screen sharing off. So it's really just us that we're looking at each other, and others can look at us. I encourage people to send chats here. Is there one already? There is a live stream chat here for everybody. So feel free to write away any questions, and Ken and I and Joe will try to get to them. And if not, yeah, thanks, Ken. It says, please post your questions here. So it's pretty
How
straightforward, everybody.
many of you do not know me? Who's knows?
Hard to tell because we've got a good audience behind here who are watching, and then those not like who will watch it on recording. Some of them might not know you, Woody. So maybe just do a brief intro on yourself, better than me butchering it.
You know what is it? I have run an international economic advisory business where our focus is on not merely the markets, quote unquote, but in my view, much more important, the real economy itself. And I'd say what I'm known for, because of the training I had, is very deep thinking. There are two ways to think. Today, if you do a PhD at Harvard, or if you're just a regular person, most people think via induction. They look for examples to support their views. They use data. As Einstein said, geniuses don't need data. He predicted how far light would bend during an eclipse in his famous 49-page relativity paper by having axioms about what governs physics and deducing mathematically the prediction. There are no data in his paper. In the three most important economic theory papers of the century, two written by Kenneth Arrow, the youngest Nobel Prize winner, and my thesis advisor, there is no data. There are no data at all. Today, everything has to be based upon data. But as the old joke goes, pointed out by the philosopher David Hume, you can count a million swans and never find a black one, but that does not mean there isn't. But when you could lay down axioms like on a straight table, there's only one shortest line between 2 points, and that's the straight line. Nobody would disagree with that. That's called an axiom. When you lay down axioms and then 20 pages later, he proves that all the angles in the triangle always add to 180 degrees. You don't have to go test it once. It has to be right because it follows from the act. Now, I can apply that to what makes a society a good society, what explains growth, but it's always from first principle. So this will seem a little bit different to you if we get into certain topics. I also don't disagree with the market unless they get things wrong, or excuse me, unless I think that they're misinterpreting what's going on. I'm not a person who just disagrees contrarian at all. But we're living in a time when the Fed governors and others are getting a great deal wrong. The first thing they're getting wrong, and the public doesn't understand, is that the Fed doesn't matter anymore except to the markets. Will sound to you like a very strange statement, because all you read is it's about the Fed, the Fed. The fact is, the Fed has traditionally, in an era when investment spending and new plans dominated the economy, been able by changing the Fed funds rate to slow down or close down new plants and put people out of work, bring disinflation and do this and that. But now we live in a service economy, 12 major service sectors: tourism, education, travel, lawyers, government workers, uh, which have no inventory cycles, which is what was the core of the old business cycle going back 70 years. And not only is there no inventory cycle, unlike Ford Motor and General Motors, who went up and down together when cars expanded, U.S. Steel expanded, and vice versa, you have these big correlations between industries in the past. I did a study showing that the average correlation between all the peers amongst the 12 service sectors, employing 82% of us, is zero. There's no correlation. When strip club managers do well, lawyers do badly. It's that kind of one. So that is why the most important statistic that you should know, that most people don't know, is that the riskiness of life has dropped 90% since your grandfather was born. Let me put that mathematically. The standard deviation, the ups and downs per decade in the last 12 decades, since 1900, the standard deviation, how much and down, are two variables: consumption and GDP. That number, in both cases, the standard deviation, the riskiness dropped 90%. That's something I began working on 90 years ago. I'm the first. So coming out, it's true. And I think part of that is the fact that the Fed's changing short-term interest rates doesn't matter to most anybody anymore. It's lost control. Now, I've worked with the Fed. Many of the people there, I view the third-rate economists. They don't think fundamentally. They take the old model and extend it. So only 2 years ago, you all knew perfect that this huge 550 basis point interest rate hike by the Fed in a very short period would kill the economy. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
There was not even a slowdown. That's what I'm looking. So I know what does close the slowdown and what doesn't. So when I don't agree with the consensus, that's what we write about. And today the topics are such that I'm not sure I know or have much to add to the topics today. And when I don't know something, I really don't talk about it. This is no value to you. But there are these areas like huge economic stability. And as far as the Fed goes, since Congress is stalled and in gridlock, everybody just loves to think there's a man or a woman with a dial who can change things and things go up and down. But other than the stock market, which cares hugely about every word of the Fed, the idea that Main Street, which is what God cares about, God could care less about the markets. They're epiphenomenal to Main Street: hopes, dreams, jobs, family, etc. Main Street is just very, very different. And we'll talk about these things. But anyway, uh, the Fed, when I said that turning the dial doesn't do much anymore, that's absolutely correct. Not only did you see that recently, but what you probably don't know is that the Fed has totally reinvented itself precisely because of this reason in the last 20 years. The role of the Fed now, while they talk about controlling inflation, is much more fundamentally, it's an organization with far greater powers than ever before. In crises, American Airlines doesn't go broke. The Fed sends a 20 billion, totally unconstitutional. They will do anything to prevent recession, including with the fiscal authorities running the hugest deficits in history, as if that doesn't matter at all. And it will bring us down. The Fed now, rather than raising the Fed funds rate, which is only the overnight rate, but it does not change the long-term rate, since we're a nation where everything is long-term financed. The Fed funds rate not only doesn't matter, but it shouldn't, because it doesn't stop borrowing. Okay. Long rates, if they go way up, but the Fed cannot control, can kill an economy, stop all sorts of things, and bring about recession. But the Fed can't control. So if there are recessions, but with my point about 90% less riskiness of life, the Fed doesn't need to do very much. It's a self-stabilizing economy. The Fed is needed for G10 crises. And it introduces the hugely powerful new tool called QE and buys and injects 5 trillion into the banking system of bank reserve. That's new. The biggest new control of the Fed, which you never read about, is the 2014 Interest Rate Remuneration Act to control the economy to the extent that bank lending matters. The Fed will tell all the banks that belong to it, we're going to charge you 4% a year on holding reserves, which are the basis of the loans it makes to Woody Brock. We'll charge you 4% for holding reserves. So get off your ass, get out there and make a lot of loans to Woody Brock and heat up the economy. Or if the economy is too strong, it says we're going to fine you unless you keep a lot of your reserves at home. We will pay you a big interest rate to keep reserves at home. We will fine you for keeping them. This time, stay in your chair and swivel and stop looking for Woody Brocks to make loans to they're too indebted or the economy's too hot or whatever. You all see what I mean?
Yep.
Now control the rate the banks pay for the reserves, which are the center of the entire system. And that means even if you quote print money by doing QE, it begins to heat up Main Street, which pushes up prices because there's more demand than supply. The Fed can completely obviate that by saying, no, you aren't. You're going to cut back loans on Woody Brock. And we'll make sure, too, you're rewarded for not looking for any Woody Brock to expect on. So that's just what I'm saying. I think in that way. Now, moving to the issue this morning, I don't have a lot to say about the elections. I'll keep my comment short. A, I think she'll win. B, I think that two things happened to him. I think that after 4 weeks that she came out and shocked the world by being the new nominee, Trump, the wind was out of his sail and nothing happened. He couldn't reply to her, he didn't reply. She just made gain after gain, and he was sort of dead. Then last night, 2 nights ago, obviously she did much better. She was much sharper, younger, more relevant. And while a lot of what she said is lies, because she's a radical left-wing politician, she knows, as my friend Bill Clinton taught me, that this country is 85% centrist, and there are very few radical nuts on the left or the right. And so she's now having to reach to the center and pretend she's all for small business, which the Democrats have killed off in the last 50 years with more and more red tape. She's becoming very we care about the family, the middle class, and this and that, not mentioning her belief that you should have sex changes up till you're 9 months pregnant. So, in other words, she's being very sensible and saying things people like to hear. And I think she will convince enough independents that she will win. And I think Trump is in real trouble. But elections are real tricky. So you can't be sure of any of that. And you can't be sure what might happen in the next 2 months. But my odds would be 60-40 that she wins. You know, some weird thing in the Electoral College could cause something, but I'm too stupid to know what that might be. So, number two, I think a point everyone misses is that you have this great polarization we're talking about, making it seem as if the one or the other one loss, whoever it is who wins, can really matter. Ours is a country where, because of checks and balance, the president has very little. The founding fathers gave the power to the president in only one form, which is he's commander in chief, and he's in charge of foreign policy. But domestically, with the courts at the local level, Supreme Court level, the Congress, the House, the Senate, and the executive office, the idea that somebody comes in and just changes everything the way they would like to won't work. It won't get through. So we seem to have a quite stable situation here, no matter who's president, because we are middle class. And anybody who attacks the middle class or who doesn't pay attention to it will be instantly voted out of office. For example, everyone knows our Medicare, our Social Security system is bankrupt with 120 trillion of unfunded liability. shocking statement. 4 times GDP or 3 times GDP. No one to pay for our children's Social Security. Nobody. No matter who the candidate is. Whether you want to cut Social Security, which Trump in some ways does, or raise it as she would like to do. It doesn't matter because it can't be touched. It can be increased. But the voters are upset with old age security. They're worried about the debt. They worry about will Social Security be there for me? A poll of 20-year-olds showed that 80% believe it was more likely they'd see a flying saucer than get any Social Security when they get old because we have moving into the future to the extent that we have. So what I'm saying is, no matter what the view of this polar presidential split is, they'll please the middle class. Now that's gone too far. We're a very spoiled nation. For example, she gave a wish list of 48 programs for more child benefits, typical Democrat, more spending, more benefits for everybody. And Trump wants tax, which is a bigger deficit, and all of that. And what has happened is it was the Republicans were always, once upon a time, when the party existed, for balanced budgets and stuff, the Democrats have always been big spenders. The deficits were not big at all. Last year, peacetime full employment deficit was 7% of GDP. Full employment, right. This is unbelievable. It means in a bad recession, it would be 12% of GDP. This is sort of Peruvian numbers. And the point here is we are so spoiled as a people that first we're facing war. Don't clap me. I'm not going to get that drop. Get some poor black person from the South. They seem to like to go up and die. Yes, he's right. She's right. Whoever the president is, um, it's good that we have more a raise in Social Security. It's good we give more child tax credits. It's good that we do this. It's good that we do that. All through history, there used to be an independent press, particularly James Reston, my father's friend, was the number 1 columnist in the nation, the New York Times. A Biden or Obama saying we're going to do this, 48 million infrastructure, that. This journalist would not let the president off the stage without saying, quote, sir, you just proposed 4.2 trillion of extra spending when we already have a huge debt. Now ask who's going to pay for all these new things. Have you noticed the liberal media has never once ever questioned how we're going to pay for any of this crap? They just don't talk about it. He would say, James Rest, sir, you're not answering. Why aren't you taxing people to pay for the benefits they want? And he'd say, oh, politically, you can't raise taxes anymore, which is true. You cannot raise taxes despite staggering debt. Only solvable by either cutting spending, which you can't do either, or raising taxes, which you can't do politically because we won't have it. So he'll say, oh, sir, you're saying you're not going to pay for it by raising taxes. Then you cut a lot of spending somewhere else. We can't do that politically. So, sir, it sounds to me like you're saying you're going to do what you've been doing for the past, particularly 10 years. Fuck the children. Excuse my English. I mean, screw the children without asking their permission and saddle them with staggering debt of 60 trillion. Okay? On the debt servicing costs of that. Don't even ask what that's going to do to society. Okay. So, whoever is in charge can't do much about the fact that in America you will be booted out of office if you do anything that hurts the people. So all their talk means they're constrained in what they'll gibber and jabber and talk, but they're actually not very different. Now Trump certainly, were he elected, has eccentricities. He'd like to come in and reappoint judges in the judicial system. He would make big changes. But the notion, for example, that he's going to put 25% tariffs on all foreign goods. He can propose that. He can want it. He can pretend that he's the king. That wouldn't get 1 vote in the Senate because big money owns government. owns government. The minute you become a senator, the afternoon of your first day, your phone calls are all about raising money for your second election 6 years later. That's an unfortunate aspect of our country's system. It's very bad. So, once again, something like that. I mean, in particular, this notion of taxing unrealized capital gains. I mean, would you like to pack if you have a $500,000 house in Toronto? Would you like to be told that you've made a gain out of the 400,000? Could you please pay 20% of that? You'd be up in arms, even the Canadians, correct? Well, my country,
Yes,
the
yes and no, Woody. I don't think you'll find a house in Toronto for that price. So it's crazy how expensive things are everywhere. But Toronto's one of the highest in the world, and our youth, our kids, they can't afford to buy homes here, so they're having to move out of the cities and into
no,
the
no,
country. It's changing.
you're absolutely right, and it's partly the same here in some of our cities. All I'm saying is that anyone who thinks that they're going to charge $10,000 per bale for reparations for sins of their ancestors, the slaves, or anyone who's going to get a big percentage of your net worth before you sell the house to make a gain. How far would you think that would get in Congress? So it looks as if Trump would do all kinds of crazy things. My point to you is they're all tied into the same thing because they don't want to get fired out of office. So he won't do it because we're middle of the road in the country, except in one regard, debt, where we are so spoiled that not only do we not have a draft, so Woody Brock never has to be drafted to defend this country, likewise, we can go infinitely into debt. Now, Japan has twice as much debt per GDP as we do. They have a huge amount of debt. My God, this was in the last 15 years. Oh my God, why aren't they bankrupt? You can have as much debt as you want. If interest rates are zero, it costs nothing to finance. Then when interest rates went up, they went and bought in debt from the market. They bought in government securities by giving my mother and pension fund cash or whatever you want. The balance sheet of the Bank of Japan, well, we have 5 trillion of securities we've bought in that are on the balance sheet of our Fed. They have 53% of their total debt in the past 100 years built up. 50% of the debt plus is owned by the central bank. The Treasury has to pay my mother her 5% on her debt, correct? The Treasury must service my mother's debt and the pension fund's debt and Lord Rothschild's debt. To the extent that a lot of the debt just gets bought in by the Fed and held on the balance sheet, and that is debt it owes the Treasury. They both, it doesn't matter. They can default. They can take 3 trillion of debt. We have 35 trillion. They can take 10 trillion and they can just denominate it so that those 30-year bonds are now 100-year bonds like England did with no payoff. And then you don't have to pay for the interest expense of having that debt. Now, this is a very risky strategy, but QE was the beginning of it. Right. So there's lots that can go on. All I'm really trying to say to you all is that the president, while he has some power, and a lot of show is constrained in many ways, which is why things don't seem to happen, except for all these silly words we hear from people. But having said that people are eating dogs in Springfield, Illinois, that what was it that the immigrants are eating it? I think he's so discredited himself and looking simply preposterous that I think it's unlikely Trump will win. And with her, it'll be exactly more of the same. She talks about a new way forward, a new America. Complete crap. America has a problem, and that is it's not trusted by the world because we have no guts when it comes to enforcing our alliances. We just do sanctions, but oh my God, we'll never put troops on the ground. So we're not a reliable ally anymore anywhere in the world. We're wimpy, and and then secondly, the economy is the way it is. The good news is our economy is extremely good other than that. It's good for a very deep reason. For 20,000 years, the power and wealth of a nation depended on how much land it had. That's why you went to grab the Ruhr Valley, correct? Because from there came slaves, minerals, food, and land was power. Today, no nation wants power in the form of taking land from someone else because it just creates civil wars. It's a pain in the ass. And we don't need the slaves nor much anything else. Today, power is wealth of a different kind than holding land. It's owning 11 companies and founding the 11 companies in America, like Amazon, the total market value of which is more than the total stock market value of Japan and England and Germany. This is simply incredible. It's science fiction. It's happened, and if you're an American, you know why. It's not simply that we have so many young people who have the confidence to drop out of school and start their own thing and get the new idea. I think young people everywhere are creative. But we have my friend Arthur Pattis. That's why we've done what we've done, uniquely in history. And Arthur Patterson will say, well, I'll see him for half an hour. I don't really want to be here. Some ragamuffin with lousy halitosis and bad breath and bad manners. And this young person comes in Friday afternoon, and Arthur didn't want to see him. He's a venture capitalist I grew up with. And he hears this person, gets very interested. They spent an hour and a half. The guy leaves. He's coming back Monday. Arthur picks up the phone and says, and I know this personally from him. I want him followed. I want to know every number he dials. I want to know everyone he sees. He's coming back noon. I want a $150 million check on my designated payable at 9 in the morning. But the guy comes back with the bad clothes and the bad manners. And only in America, over a weekend, would someone decide somebody's worth $150 million check. In Germany, you can't get $10,000 out of your billionaire grandfather whose risk is a dirty word. I forgot to tell you who the man was, the young person with grubby clothes. His name was Mark Zuckerberg. And Arthur's family made $2 billion off of that themselves as the brokers. Nowhere else in history have people with ideas been able to get them financed, and you have to do that or your ideas don't matter at all. China is run by a crook, torturer, and thug. President Xi came in 2012. By 2016, when the world was sure China would be much bigger than the U.S., this man had become, and said he was, a communist, and he wanted to rebuild the great communist party, and did. Total control. Who you're sleeping with, a camera in your bedroom, your parents seized and tortured to get your secrets if necessary. No rule of law. So the most valuable resource today, talent, is fled to New Zealand. Big article in the New York Times yesterday. Fled to America. Fled to Britain. And Japan's growth rate, if you didn't know it, is, as I predicted in 2016, if you adjust it properly, it's zero. So when you had a non-communist, quasi-capitalist period, growth exploded, as you know, from 1980 to 2010 to 30 at 10% a year. Staggering and incredible. Chinese are different. They're brilliant. Wrong. Under the right government with the rule of law, Ghana, nothing but black people, imagine, grew at 10% as well. We're all the same. We need opportunity. We need to know the rule of law is enforced. And the big story on the planet Earth, one of two, one being that people will not be having children anymore. But the second story is that Russia, China, and all of Latin America and Africa is now ruled by thugs who come in and abolish the rule of law, which, as David Hume taught Adam Smith, was more important than capitalism, because you wouldn't have capitalism. And I wouldn't do a deal with you all if I knew that you could bribe the judge to ruin me. There'd be no capitalism. Rule of law is the most important thing, and for 30 years we watched it absolutely disappear after thug took over. So don't tell me it's about interest rates or something. Growth is about the willingness of people to risk their capital, start new ideas, and do the kind of things that Ghana did, we've done, And China did for 30 years. I've been a little bit all over the map, but I'm just trying to point out the big stories going on. Who's elected doesn't matter that much, although I think Trump would be an exception in that he'd offend people. And his matters are so terrible and his lies are so extensive. So let me stop the questions and disagreements. That's my feeling about the election. She'll win, probably, and it's going to be more of the same. And her visions of the new this and new that, the whole thing is nonsense. She has not made a single original plan, at least one that didn't cost us a 20% rise in our world famous debt crisis, but which she's never mentioned. Okay, let me stop.
Yeah,
Questions about the election. Questions about some of the things that's going to affect this agreement.
we try to be apolitical, but seeing that you've talked a bit about it, here's a question that came in. What about a Trump-Vance presidency would do to prices, i.e. tariffs, and conversely, what a Harris-Walz presidency would do to prices, i.e. mass spending? Can you carry on a little bit more about talking about tariffs and so forth?
Nobody, because all economists and history have shown that tariffs reduce competition and therefore productivity. I mean, I'm not going to be too productive in Kansas if I no longer have to compete with people in Taiwan, correct?
Yeah.
So tariffs spoil you, make you weak, less competitive, less innovative, and living standards grow slower. Nobody would pass the tariffs, even if they wanted them. But you asked the second part of the question that I didn't understand.
Yeah, it's just on the opposite. What happens if Harris-Walz win and with that presidency, and what that would do to prices, i.e. mass spending? So that the person writing this is assuming that the Democrats are going to spend more than the Republicans.
But where did the word prices come from? You mean inflation?
Inflation, yes.
Okay. So if we have them come in, would they create more inflation?
Or the person suggesting the tariffs for the first party could
consider
inflation as well.
They wouldn't consider tariffs.
Right.
Much. And I've already said, even if they wanted it, business runs the country. Get it? They pay for your reelection. You think you're going to put tariffs on? It could happen, but I think there'd be a big outburst against it. I'm not sure, but I don't think tariffs are the main story here at all. They're not part of the debt story. They're not part of the interest rate story. Would tariffs be creating higher inflation? Then would there be, if you didn't have tariffs? Yes, because tariffs would raise the price to me of paying for anything that the company who sold it to me has had to pay. They pass on their cost to me. So inflation for what he brought would be increased significantly by tariffs, regardless of who put them on. But inflation will be affected by far many other things, of which I think that's not particularly important. Mainly because I know that if a tariff is put on, it wouldn't be put on everything, and I don't think it would be large. It's inflationary, for sure.
Uh-huh.
And it's inflation. To the second order, because what keeps prices down and living standards up is productivity, which comes from competition. And tariffs, as I just said earlier, would mean you didn't have to work very hard. I won't come out with a new version of an iPhone next year because, well, maybe some other country did, but it can't afford the tariff. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So the more competition, the more force there is for our companies to have to innovate and innovate and innovate because of foreign competition. Obviously, that benefits average people because now they get a new phone that costs 10% as much. So I hope that answers that.
Yeah, but let's stay on the word, the term, the notion inflation. Governments in the past, doesn't matter which political party, have gone further into debt, and they've all justified it, of course, and they're all running deficits. You haven't had a balanced budget since Bill Clinton. I don't want to go way back there. I want to talk about right now. Is it still the notion that we can inflate our way out of all of these debts? And as you say, for Japan, the debts didn't matter. And maybe you'd say the same thing for the states too. I mean, I think you have.
The debts it's going to matter to Japan when interest rates are now 5%, not zero. I said they got away with a hell of a lucky break.
Yeah, because they just financed everything themselves, including their post office owning everything too.
It's not, the Japanese economy is very hard to explain or understand, I might add. It just doesn't offer a lot of lessons for us. It's its own little world. The question you asked, the main question you said, turning it, is it about inflation you want to know, or is it what
Can inflation truly solve these debt problems down the road?
the problem? Let me ask the canonical question. As we get further and further into debt, what happens when a nation goes broke, about which I sent out a paper 6 months ago? As Walter Wriston, the chairman of Citicorp, said, famously, nations don't go broke if they have their own printing press. So the notion of running out of money has no meaning when you can just print dollars and pay your bill. But not everybody has a sovereign printing. We don't have to worry about that. What people will say, let me put it very starkly, is Woody, the obvious way to reduce this debt or get out of it is to cut spending radically and raise taxes radically. That's, of course, the textbook Keynesian truth. But today, with our spoiled people, cutting spending a lot, which means entitlement spending, because that's what all spending is, you couldn't touch it. It will never happen. We won't raise taxes and we won't cut spending. That's what it means to be spoiled. We'll go on having big deficits. And the CBO in Washington, who does these things, said that the deficit will basically rise forever because there are more and more aging Woody Brocks to be supported, and because the huge change in the planet Earth is that women aren't having children. That's unbelievable. If you think of a society, you have to bake a pie in the oven that's enough food for children, old people who can't produce pie, and then you have workers who do produce pie. But the rate at which they can increase the size of the pie that everyone has to eat gets smaller and smaller as the workforce shrinks. That means there's just not enough pie, i.e., the price of pie goes way up. Now, robots will replace the babies that I'm not having, and immigrants will be very important. So it's not that much of a problem because immigration is not going to stop. It's all over the world. They'll come into Yugoslavia, they'll come into Italy. So I think that is exaggerated, but it is an astounding thing that happened. When I finished Harvard, we were lectured to that the Earth would collapse with the weight of 10 billion people. It was then going towards 8. The idea that they're now announcing the world will shrink is unbelievable. It will have huge consequences. But once again, the number of marriages is half, and the number of children is now down to, in the most successful economy in the world, South Korea, will lose half of its people in 38 years because no one's having children. Everything's changed. Women have their own income. Male-female relations are radically being changed. And children become, as you say, because of housing costs. Having children means more rooms, more rent. It's just, quote, uneconomical. So people don't want it, or they'll have one child. The average right now is 1.4. I think that's what we have. But a lot of countries like China and Russia are down around 1 baby. You need 2.2 babies per woman for a population to stay constant. When my father was born, you had 5.5 babies per woman. So this is a big stuff. Now I want to get back to your question. You said, what was the basic question is?
Well, just basic. What can we notionally inflate our way out of these debt problems? Or 20 years from now, is debt going to be twice as large?
You have to be very careful. I will give you what I believe to be the correct answer. Since the first way to get out of debt is to cut spending and raise taxes, then we won't. Another way as well will inflate our way out. And it's absolutely true. If God does something to raise the inflation rate to 50% a year on every commodity, our GDP will grow hugely, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, because inflation's in there. So that means after 20 years, the outstanding debt from the revolution of 35 trillion becomes a much smaller share of the GDP. So in principle, you outgrow your debt. That you can do. Sounds great. There's only one flaw. There's one price, and only one price, which the government can't raise. The only price that matters, labor. It can't tell companies to raise the wages every year 50% because they will say they can't do it without having serious financial problems. And they have the choice of closing their businesses, creating unemployment, and further misery at home. So the fact that one price out of a million can't be managed by government means that when you have every price being controlled by government, including labor, I don't care if inflation's 1,000%, because if tomorrow prices went up 1,000, then so did my salary. But when my salary goes up by 700%, and everything I buy goes up by 1,000, you then end up with a fundamental point about outgrowing your debt. This is the broad inroad. Always outgrowing your debt means lower living standard. Forget price, forget inflation. What matters to God is, do people live better tomorrow or not? And when they don't, the veneer of civilization is very thin, and you'll have broken window after broken window, including even in the Pacific place like Florida. So you can't inflate your way out without a big. It does reduce the debt. It does reduce the debt because the GDP grows hugely, but living standards don't keep up. And that is the point that matters. Another way you can do all of this, which I think is what will happen, is since we refuse to inflate our way out, or we refuse to tax people hugely to get rid of the deficit and cut spending, since we won't do it, we won't do anything. But others will. The rest of the world, not to mention my mother, who buys the bonds issued by the Treasury every year to cover exactly the deficit. Yes, it borrows from my mother to cover the deficit because tax revenues don't do it. So the Treasury issues the IOUs, the bonds my mother owns, and the people all over the world. And what happens is, it's not that people stop buying them, because for mathematical reasons, having to do with the capital current account equality, which people don't understand, they have to go on buying our assets as long as we have a trade debt, which we would. The point, the main point here, we love you, America, but you're not very trustworthy anymore. We'll continue to buy your treasuries if you pay us 15% a year. That went to 90% in Greece 12 years. Once again, people aren't slaves. They choose to buy treasuries. And as you know, it's called either an inflation premium or a risk premium, or both would cause the uh, people to demand more safety and protection so that long-term rates would go up. And long-term rates determine the economy, and the Fed can't control them. QE does not control long rates. So you can't turn my mother and Jacob Rothschild into slaves and just order them to buy our securities. Supply will equal demand. And so when they want higher returns, they'll get them. Period. It's a market phenomenon of supply and demand that the Fed can't touch. That means higher long-term rates, which is how we finance our new homes and factories, will kill the economy. That means the bottom line result is much higher unemployment than negative growth. So what my real point here is, once you've been getting fat by overeating for 30 years, and finally you're being forced to get thin again, it hurts. It hurts. In my language, living standards having gone up hugely start to go down. So there's no easy way out. Inflating your way out sounds good, but people don't understand it. Show me where it's worked.
Right. So going back to this is sort of a question in recent news about government statistics.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the recent job market and the revisions the government's made in recent months? So when you see job revisions, I think it was like 818,000 jobs. Like, whoops, oh, we overcounted those. And is this politically motivated, or is this just
Not only not I know that people who do the work in the Department of Labor Statistics, there are not nearly enough people working there, and revisions have been common for 50 years. Now it's becoming political. The way vaccines, when I got a polio vaccine in 1950, and it was no question, it was wonderful, and I rushed to get my vaccine. Today it's become so political. Do vaccines work at all? It's ridiculous.
Mhm.
So I think the revisions can be either upward or downward. What matters is, likewise, it's awkward that the amount of people that retired are re-entering the workforce. You have to add in this whole, it's not as easy as how many new jobs are created. You have no new jobs created, but lots of old people go back to work. So I forget the number for all of this. But your question was, is it political? I think the answer is absolutely not. Once again, it's this whole modern conspiracy theory. I've never known one conspiracy theory to be right. The CIA blew up the Twin Towers. Still, lots of people believe that.
Mhm.
So I think that that is not something you should think much about. But the overall employment rate does say something. And it's been strong, very strong in this country, partly a comeback from COVID. But it's always been true. And one reason why employment is created here is was best expressed in a memo I wrote for Dick Fisher and for Bill Clinton way back. It's the only thing I've ever written because I'm very unpolitical. It was sent to every prime minister on earth, and that was some 10-page article. The title sold it. How the nation that fired the most fired them. So the U.S. during the period I considered fired far more people. France was the worst. They don't allow you to. So the more we fire, the more we get new jobs that pay better, living standards go up. It's a paradox. It's a paradox. Whereby in the last 240 years since, what's his name, since Adam Smith, capitalism, and nowhere else except capitalism, everyone's been fired. Farmers were 92%, now they're 2% of the population. Everyone's, no more typists, no more any, everyone is terrified of the loom in Manchester, England, and the Luddite Revolution, directed, put people out of work. I couldn't sew anymore, machines. The more you let that happen, let people get fired for totally counter to the reasons of general equilibrium theory in economics, you will find everybody gets a new job and typically at a higher wage than before. And the result of those two statements is the extraordinary statement of all statements. Living since 1975 in capitalist countries where you can innovate and design new mousetraps every week rose 34-fold in the West since 1775. Let me repeat. It takes 1/34th of the time you work to buy what you bought with 1 year of work in 1770. And that is the bottom 50%, not the rich. Average people's living standard, people from no background, no money whatsoever, wear the same Reeboks and the same cell phones as the Rockefeller great grandchildren. It's been the average people that have benefited the most in what matters to God, which is living notions like productivity and real wage growth that you read about out the window because the whole set of national income accounting has changed from what it was supposed to be under Simon Kuznets, who invented it for Roosevelt in 1932, but that's a different matter. What matters is I live much better, period. And the countries that didn't do this were the ones today ruled by thugs and torturers with no rule of law. Go look at the growth rates there. Look at the unemployment rates. The inequality is double. Wonderful communist China, measured by the Gini coefficient. than it is in America. So there's total confusion about what capitalism can do. Furthermore, Adolf Hitler believed one income, one person working 8 hours a day should be able to support a family. He would think it's shocking that you have to have 3 jobs to support the family. Well, there's an answer to some of this, and it's an answer completely compatible with competitive market equilibrium economics in Texas. Notice the second fundamental theorem of welfare economics. It says you can have redistribution from rich to poor without impacting efficiency at all. So if the market awards a surgeon $1 million a year and a janitor $14 an hour, the public say per outfit, everybody has to $25,000 a year to survive. So what you do is you send in your pay stub as a janitor for $14 an hour, proving you work. Repeat, proving that you work full time and you made 14,000. It's right there on your IRS stub, and the government sends you a check for 11,000, tax free, to bring your income up to the level where one worker required. Now we're supposed to be doing this already. We're supposed to have much higher tax rates on rich people than on poor. I think you do in Canada much better than we do. But you have the joke of Warren Buffett that with all the loopholes sponsored by Washington, why am I, Warren Buffett, in the same tax bracket as my secretary? This is how pathetic it is in this country. I'm sure that's not true in Canada. So these, I think, are important points. Questions, disagreements.
No disagreements. We're definitely, they know how to tax us here, that's for sure. I've had a few sets of friends up here this summer. I think I told you at the beginning, never even been to Canada before, and the whole topic of income tax rates, and it's not even close, especially when we've got our own HST here, which is an extra 13% on everything you buy. So,
Oh, yeah.
and that's around the corner for you guys, because there's no way they can just carry on with just simple income tax.
No. I mean, and you know, the Nobel Prize, looking at what types of raising money through taxation is least distorting to the economy, i.e., least efficient. No, most efficient.
Most efficient, yeah.
It is the tax on goods you buy. The worst tax is taxing labor. So if you tax labor and just make it more expensive to hire people, the damage done to the efficiency of the economy is much greater than if you raise the same amount of putting a 24% VAT on rather than 18. And we're considering adding one to our subject. It's a minor point, but it's just for reasons that are not obvious at all. Again, it was Kenneth Arrow who proved that theorem. Better to have to tax consumption than to tax labor. And that is why these 14% Social Security taxes on top of income taxes, the whole thing is just inefficient and a messy way to raise money. That I suspect we'll be using everything under the sun to raise tax money because the debt is getting so big. How's Chinese debt? Sorry, how's Canadian?
We're behind you. We're behind you a percent of GDP, and we haven't done to the same extreme that you've had to over the years with quantitative easing and then so forth. But we're still, it's not the old 10-to-1 rule. We're just slightly behind the 10-to-1 rule when it comes to our population changes or differences. But we're still up there. You know, we've still got good taxes. We've got governments, and once again, I don't want to get political, but we've got governments up here who, they know how to spend just like they all do. And giving things away, we're around the corner from an election. There's going to be astronomical things given away, but we'll see.
This is a curse of the welfare state in general. It's what I said to you earlier. It's like fourth generation of a rich family and a founding father. By the fourth generation, all I want to do is have fun. Don't bother me with that. Don't tell me about debt. Don't tell me I'm running through my trust fund. And there is no fifth generation. In that search sleeve, the search sleeves, it's exactly the same. All empires, almost without exception, in the history of the world, have been spoiled families, whereby the fifth generation the Roman Empire starts to go down because of what I just said. They won't be taxed, and they want more from the government, or more, or more. And it takes a hit, a dictate, to stop that. Because as long as you have to get reelected in the form of government you and I have, you have to please people who are very stupid and very spoiled and think they, quote, deserve the most idiotic word in history. More, more. Oh, don't tax me to pay for that.
Mhm.
Tax my children. And this is an unfortunate part of what's going on. And I don't really see it's not the end of the world. It just means that this wonderful increase in living standards that we've experienced slows down. Just a TV. I would
Mhm.
comment, however, about this whole issue of debt to GDP. There is another measure that matters in a way more: debt to national net worth, defined by the Fed as all foundations and families, all their wealth, minus all their debt. It's called family, household, national net worth, net debt. Get it?
Mhm.
Our country, that has exploded beyond belief compared to Canada. So the debt to GDP ratio is interesting, but the fact is the wealth that backs the whole thing up, private, has grown far more than government debt. And that can matter a lot. I mean, here is, put this in perspective. The statistics called net worth divided by GDP. The average is about 3.6 for 150 years. That is, if GDP is $1 trillion, you have 3.6 trillion in net worth. Not the average, okay? Until 5 years ago, it had never hit 4. It is now 6.2. It is far the highest. And part of the reason is the wealth created by these 11 companies, call them 25 companies, that have grown compared to anything else on earth to have such a huge value. So our wealth story is pretty good. So is the best stock market in history.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, well, that's a good, maybe a segue there. Stock market. We haven't really had a true economic or stock market setback since.
uh, what you think the implications. Obviously, there's been a little
it,
volatility over the last
here,
month. So I think David was referencing, as we've seen a lot of volatility, some might be political driven in the public equity markets. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think volatility will continue to heat up as we head closer to the election? Just your personal thoughts on that.
the first thought is there are two kinds of volatility. Volatility in what matters, maybe not to you, but volatility in GDP. As I've said, it's down 90%. The elections won't matter. Then there's the volatility of the stock market and the bond market. There's no volatility in the bond market for deep reasons why, but it pretty much stays the same. The stock market has always had volatility, and the deepest game theoretical research on this topic, which Jean Tirole at MIT and I did 10 years ago, we published a paper about it, is that the more you don't know the value of an asset, like video, even if God told you the news, then it can be shown that it is rational, not irrational, to join a trend and push the price up much further than it should be. It is rational, and the reasons are very deep. But contrast that stock with a 20-year government treasury bill. Everyone knows what we call the pricing model. If you are told that interest rates will, no, that inflation will go up 3%, you'll know that the yield on the government bond will go up 2.8%. And not only does everyone know it, because they know it, they make it happen. So if it overshot and went up 4%, everybody would bring it back down because they know that was unsustainable and incorrect. So the fundamental theorem is the more asset has the property that even if you knew the news in a certain year, the earnings growth, whatever, you don't know the price. Repeat, even if I know the news, no, I do not know the right price for NVIDIA. Then it is rational people to get on board a trend and assuming their performance is judged relative to others, the cost to them of getting off the trend too early makes it more attractive to join and stay with it. And it is the rational decision. And the more flaky the stock, the less you know about its true value given the news, the thing goes on and gets much worse. So it's very interesting. In the case of bonds, you know, God tells you the news is 2% more inflation. You know the new price. So I call this pricing model uncertainty. That will not go away. And if you ask me, will it be as much or more? I can only say, because I'm not sure I understand any trends in this. The more we have a stock market composed of new companies or companies focusing on things like AI that I don't understand at all, much less on everything else, then you will expect them to have, you know, I guess you'd call it lots of volatility for the tech sector, certainly, but maybe for the whole economy. So that's, I think, a very good answer to a very, very difficult question. Now, you probably know more than I do about what's happened to overall market volatility in Canada. Has it gone way up? South Park, is your sense that it's a lot more volatile?
Think there's a lot of impatience with investors right now, so they're willing to make changes to their portfolios very quickly. They want gains now. The average retail investor definitely is a little more impatient than they were before COVID. I think there's the political volatility, the geopolitical uncertainty, and I think there's those recession fears that obviously have driven this massive volatility that we've seen over the last 5.5 weeks. And I think it could continue as we head closer to that
Then you're
November.
talking very short run. You're talking
Yeah, I'm
about
talking short run right
volatility
now.
in the last 5 weeks.
Yep,
Show me over 40 years. Is stock market volatility
up down.
higher or lower? You should look at
Comparing today's volatility relative to historical volatility, I think if you were to average it out, the last 4 years would probably be a lot higher, just purely because we had the COVID shock, we had 2022.
the news. Certainly would make you believe it should be more volatile.
Yeah,
We've right on to this morning. We've had crazy stuff going on all over the world, and the world is ever more dangerous because that's just a separate point, but it's well worth understanding. The
hmm
hugest risk, of course, is nuclear war. Huge. Now we don't think about it. But here is the problem. It's getting more likely, and here is the reason. Another Nobel Prize, Reinhard Sultan, German. Deep as deep can get. One of the great mysteries of history is why World War One happened when no one, including Germany, wanted it. And the theorem of Sultan, who got it with my colleague John Nash, the famous beautiful mind who invented game theory. They got it together. He showed, the paper was called When Two is Few and Five is Many, that when you have two nations staring at each other, disliking each other, you, Russia, me, America, by focusing on each other a lot and not being bothered by coalitions and stuff, you don't go to war. The theorem said when n equals 2, there is about an 8% probability of going to war because you don't make the mistakes and the confusions that cause a war. But at the eve of World War One, you had the Roman Empire, the British Empire, the French, the Germans, the Prussian, the Austro-Hungarian. You had 5 empires. Do you know how many coalitions can form out of 5 players? Ever seated 5 people at a dinner table and wondered how many ways of seating them there are? That's the point. It gets very complicated when you have 5, and for mathematical reasons. The likelihood jumps to 90% at 5 that you will go to war. Not wanting to. but because the event, the murder of the Archduke of Serbia in 1913, everyone had to act in accordance to what was a temporary and fluctuating alliance. Misunderstandings proliferated. No one really knew what was going on, so you played it safe by defending yourself. A war broke out that nobody wanted. So once again, this is now known in the textbook as a mistakes equilibrium. Rational behavior, Nash rational behavior, when there's all these conflicting rumors and obligations and collapsing coalitions, what's happening around the world now is it was once just Russia versus America. But now you have outbreaks in the Middle East, you have outbreaks within Russia and what's it called, Ukraine. Then
Ukraine.
Chinese doing all of their stuff. And because of this, what looked like little local events or local wars in four places, because they involve they involve the positions of the big China, Russia, America, the big three. It gets very confusing to navigate. And those three seemingly unrelated wars, which incidentally the markets don't pay much attention to.
Right.
They don't really care about Syria, but it can trigger a global conflagration, no longer just three regional disputes. And that is something I worry about a lot. Too many people who can screw up. Worse, you have entire nations run by people who do not care, look at Hamas, about their populations at all. Say what you wanted about the Emperor of Germany. He loved Germany and the people, correct? Well, if you think that the Palestinian Authority, run by terrorist groups for 40 years, has the slightest regard for the people, don't think that. They're happy to go in and use them as shields to hide their hostages and their troops and let the civilians all be killed. They didn't have to do it. But that's the way they are, the same with Iran. And I think one of the weaknesses of the West is we tend to be nice and honorable. And people refuse to accept the fact of life that there is evil, real evil. So my country, with its pathetic foreign policy, sent my friend John Kerry to Iran to negotiate a deal. Correct? Giving them $1 billion, which they took and immediately used to foster terrorists, thinking we could get them back in our fold and stop their nuclear program, which accelerated. The idea of sending John Kerry to be nice to Iran, even a dog knows whose jugular vein to go to rather than petting. So we've got to realize there is real evil, which means serious mistakes to be made, and certain leaders who don't care if 10 million people die. So anyway, this is just a personal thing. When you say, David, that you're not political, I'm not quite sure what that means. I would only say that to the extent that things like this I'm talking about will hugely affect the markets, you got to be aware. Doesn't mean you have to take sides, but boy, oh boy, the statement I just made to you should stick with you. This is genius.
Yeah.
2 is few and 5 is many. 41-page mathematical proof by a mathematician.
Yeah.
I can't. So I'm just saying, being political is a tricky question. Be aware of how political.
Yeah, we're aware. We're aware, Woody. We all read heavily as you do. We just don't publicly get into it because you're always going to tick off one side of your audience, and we just try not to do that.
It's true, and I understand that.
Yeah.
But you can certainly point out risks without seeming political. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, it's
Point out risk.
very touchy
Or
right
psych-
now. But what I was trying to get at before is we haven't had a real stock market setback since the credit crisis. You could argue that the COVID was, but that was so short-lived. Now, mind you, the government did have to intervene and do all sorts of things, but it was really 08, 09, or 2000. Those are the goalposts. And so, did this stock market start in 1980? Did it start in 2000? Did it start in 2009? There's many arguments to that. The fact of the matter is we haven't had a significant setback since 2009 of 60% range that used to be not the norm, but those were extremes. So this is what we're preparing ourselves for and our clients.
Then this is a different thing entirely. Yes, you could say the market began in 2000 or 2011 or 1980. I think what's important in all this is, however, to realize that 1981 was the year when our interest rates hit 20.
Mhm.
And since then, they've gone to zero, pushing the stock market up, despite the global events of 2010. The market went from 750 on the S&P or whatever, I get them mixed up. When I went to work at 1981, the year Volcker began to raise rates and then brought them right down. And they fell for other reasons for 40 years to zero.
Mhm.
This period was one where, as you said, there were big ups and downs with the tech bubble, the housing bubble of 2007, which caused 2010. But it took a long time. The point I'm making is that the big story is that from 66 to 81, if you indexed, you lost half your money, as my father did, after inflation. And there were ups and downs of the Vietnam War. But that period was one where inflation rose and interest rates rose, and the stock market cost him half his wealth after very high inflation due A to the Vietnam War, guns and butter, and B, the most important price in the world, oil, going in 9 years from $3.30 a barrel, $3.3 to 33. So we had a terrible period. With just after that, and after Volcker raised rates 20% for 3 weeks, then you had this 40-year, and the market went from 780 to 40,000. So I asked my client George Soros if someone had told him in 1982 what's going to happen. I'm sorry, Mr. Soros, I've just seen. I mean, God sent me a message that the market will go from today's 870, whatever it was, well below 1,000, to 40,000 in 40 years. And he said, well, I said, could you explain? He said, yeah, it's a long time, but fundamentals couldn't do that. What you're saying is there's going to be a huge bubble, bringing the PE ratios to 80 or something. Okay?
Mhm.
That would get $40,000 today. Sorry, it's a 40,000 index score.
Yeah.
George, you're wrong. God just sent me a message. There won't be any bubble at all, except in sectors like high tech. You will end up at 40,000 with a PE of 19. And with a rate of zero, the correct PE using the discount rate approach is about 23. So, in other words, a staggering stock market like we've never seen before did not owe its rise at all to bubbles or supervaluation. Instead, two things happened that investors care about, the joint probability of which both happening was zero. God could not imagine. A, interest rates fell the highest by far in history from 16 to zero. B, earnings growth per share, shares being bought in like mad. Earnings growth exploded beyond belief in America. In America. This is all America. So between exploding earnings per share and the biggest fall of interest rates, the market went up from 1,000 to 40,000, and it was not a bubble. Now, that's why I like to think of that long period as the big story. To me, the 2010 thing was an interruption. And what caused it was very simply one asset market. U.S. housing prices collapsed by 36% because of all of our ninja loans, ninja meaning no income, no assets. So we recklessly leveraged up and told poor people they had a right to have a house. The whole thing collapsed in 2007. It was bad for my country. It had nothing to do with the global crisis. But it took time for that to work through, and it brought down Lehman Brothers in 2009 or 2000 and the other bank. Since the banks are all interrelated around the world, that caused the global financial crisis because once New York big bank goes under, it was panic everywhere amongst the Fed officials. That was when new tools like QE were invented to deal with crises. And I said to you earlier today, the Fed's real power today is it will keep crises from happening because it will bail everybody out as it has been doing. Okay. So in that sense, my view is we will never again see interest rates drop 16%. I think they will go up. And I think that with all the crackdown on monopolies in Europe and in here, you're going to see a lot of the big, very high earning monopolies see a lot of their monopoly rents disappear, which is another way of saying earnings growth won't be remotely as fast as it was during that period of the digital revolution, 1981 to 2020. I do think that just as indexing was terrible for my father, wonderful for me, who put a $50,000 check from Stanford and now have $1 million. Like I do not remotely believe that can continue. More importantly, I know that earnings will not go as fast. And I know that interest rates will not possibly fall. They will rise. You see what I'm saying? So I think the way you should think about this is something happened that took 40 years and is now essentially reversing. So I would say everybody today ought to stop thinking indexing is wonderful. It was wonderful for me. Wonderful. Terrible for Dad. And I think in the future it'll be okay. But I think that you're going to have to, if you want to really make money, you have to take the risk of picking the right industry and the right stock, which, as you and I know, people hate to do because it is so risky.
Yeah. Now, we show an interest rate chart just about every day to clients and prospective clients, and it's just a big bell curve. You had 40 years up from 46 until 81, and then you have 81 back down to where we are now, or the COVID being the bottom. Back in the 60s and 70s, we argue that it looks like we're going back into an era like that with inflation driving us. And, it's if you index now, it's going to be very difficult in these levels. It's going to be more, as you just alluded to, sector rotation, being in the right industries, and timing yourself in and out. You can't just buy and hold forever. It just won't.
I would agree with that.
That indexing probably won't work as well going forward. Yeah.
No, that's a very serious point. And very few people are aware of the statistic I just told you. That my father lost half his money.
Yeah.
Over 17 years. And then mine went at I couldn't even dream. And it's never happened before. So it's just not going to continue. It has to slow down. That's not to say we'll have a depression or something. Because again, government today just has tools whereby by going ever more into debt, it can prevent recessions.
Mm-hmm.
But
then this would be another long discussion, but who's going to ultimately pay for that debt? Back in the 60s and 70s, you had rising inflation, and no one bought debt then. They had other ways to try to, or they just ignored investing altogether because they didn't have any money and put it into their homes and into trying to grow a family. But now,
hold on.
It's
be careful. Be careful. It's not that people didn't invest in bonds. The deficits were tiny.
That's what I'm getting to. Yeah.
There were no ones.
Right.
And if you have huge deficits, they will always be bought, the bonds, at some price.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a 15% yield or a 10. This is obvious through history.
Mm-hmm.
People cannot be slaves and the wishes of the Fed because of what's been going on. They can wish all they want. They can't control the long-term rates that Jacob Rothschild said by refusing to buy our paper. Or interestingly, they could buy Pilodyne bonds or GM bonds.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody say, if government we don't trust, we're not going to buy treasuries. But the rest of the world loves this country, and they're going to buy farmland, and they are buildings, this and that. They don't have to buy any debt at all. They do, however, have to put money into America every year, equal to our trade deficit. That's a very complex story. I just want to point out, as long as we have a $300 billion trade deficit, We have 300 billion of the world's savings coming into America, more than we invest in other countries around the world. So the trade deficit on current account equals the capital inflow from the world net of what we do buying assets around the world. So this is a very important thing to remember, i.e., if China and Japan hate us and we're going to dump all your bonds, they can't. They sell them. But by international accounting logic, they have to be bought by other partners. You can never get rid of the bonds by making America buy them back. They will always be sold to others. And the result, if three big countries don't like us anymore and they don't, want to buy our bonds, yet the bonds have to be bought, or they're not paid for their trade deficit. That's the logic. Then what happens will be the dollar falls in half. And they have to buy bonds, but they really want to put less money into American bonds because they don't like us. With the currency falling in half of their money buys the same number of bonds we need to finance the trade deficit. That's the fundamental point. The dollar does the work, letting them to put much less money into a bad America than it used to, because now it takes half as much of their money in their currencies to give us what we need in our currency. And the last point I will make is there's only one way for us to have a huge trade surplus, because we're a trade deficit nation because the dollar is low. That is for Woody Brock to invent what he's been working on for 40 years. And then we'll have a huge trade surplus. It's a machine. You saw it in Woody Allen's movie Sleepers. It's known as the orgasmatron. You get in shaking. And if I finish investing in patenting this, the whole world will want 3 of them. And we'll have a huge trade deficit, which means no capital inflow, because now we have to provide the capital from a trade surplus. And then you would see interest rates really low. So much for that. Any quick last questions I can just answer in 30 seconds?
Well, there's someone asking what currency you do like. If you're seeing, it said BRIC versus US dollar is the long-winded question. So are there any currencies you'd like around the world?
What versus US dollar?
The BRIC, there's not even a currency for the BRIC, but for the BRIC nations, Brazil, Russia,
India,
China, and now others are trying to get in as well.
The answer is very simple. We were 52% of the world economy at the end of World War II. We're now 19. People say, why do we still have 54% of the reserve currencies of the world? Why does China have 1? Why doesn't China have 30? We have 30. We're equal size, correct? Answer to the question you asked. The whole goddamn world, including the Revolutionary Guards of Iran that want to torture you, are setting up with all their stolen money, trust funds for their grandchildren. Trillions of money every year flow to the Caymans, and within one day are invested in what country? Can I hear it? Can I hear it? They all want U.S. assets.
Right.
But to buy U.S. assets, dry cleaning change, farmland, ranches, government bonds, and stocks, to buy the assets that with its huge excess savings fluff that Larry Summers and I have written about. What do you think you have to buy before you buy a farm? Can I hear it? Dollars. So that is why BRIC is a mess. China is a mess. Do you think that the middle class conservative central bankers of the world are going to put their money into China? These are middle class risk averse professionals. Put it into China. Have it stolen the next day with no rule of law? They adore the United States. Okay, so that's one reason why the notion that BRIC will replace us is absurd until they get their governments in order. Any other final?
No, that's it. I think that's great. I've enjoyed my time as well. Thank you for your time.
Hope springs eternal.
Thank you for all your time, Woody.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Oh, take care now. Bye-bye.